Once upon a time, there was a king who lived in a palace with lots of money, and he wanted to understand how the poor were happy, if they were truly happy, and how they were so happy. The king decided to dress in disguise as a beggar. He found a seamstress who made him a suit out of rags. He put mud and dust on his face, in his hair, and on his arms, and he set off into the market town to see what he could discover. The king, now in rags, disguised as a beggar, wandered around the market town and came across a cottage. It looked very decrepit and run down, so he decided to knock on the door and see who lived there. An old man answered the door with a big smiley face and invited him in to share his supper. Supper consisted of stale bread and broth, not at all what the king was accustomed to. However, determined to stay in disguise, he ate the bread and broth gratefully. Whilst eating, the king in rags asked the old man about his life and learnt that he was a cobbler and that he mended and shined people's shoes every day and then used the money he earned to buy his dinner for that night. The king did not understand how the old cobbler could be so happy with this existence. He asked, "How are you so happy? What if you don't make enough money one day for food? What if nobody wants their shoes shined or fixed anymore? Aren't you worried about starving or losing your home?" The cobbler replied, "I do not waste time worrying about what I cannot control and what has not happened yet. Instead, I am happy that I have faith and trust that all will be well." The king in rags was very frustrated by this reply and felt that the cobbler was very naive and that life just was not that simple. The king was determined to show the cobbler that he was wrong in thinking like this, and he thought up a plan. The next day, the king, back in his palace, set forth his plan to show the cobbler how wrong he was about life being simple and relying on faith. He set a law for the town to ban all cobblers. People should fix and polish their own shoes. Ha! That would show him, the king thought. The cobbler left his home that day and learned of the new law banning all cobblers. He wondered what he was going to do. He noticed an old lady collecting water from the well. She was struggling to carry her pails. "Well, I may as well make myself useful," he thought. "Maybe an idea will come to me whilst I help this lady." He carried the heavy pails of water to the lady's house and said goodbye and turned to leave, and she paid him a coin. He went back to the well and helped other people carry water. Some paid him and some did not. He never asked for payment, he just wanted to be useful and kind. At the end of the day, the now water carrier had enough money to buy bread and cheese. The king, now back in his rags, turned up at the once cobbler's door and knocked, eager to learn how he had coped with the new law. Once inside the man's home, he noticed bread and cheese on the table and again was welcome to share it with him. The king in rags asked, "How did you afford all this? I heard through the grapevine that there was a law banning cobblers." The man told the king in rags the story of his day as a water carrier. The king again felt frustration and asked the water carrier, "What if tomorrow nobody wants water carrying? Maybe they now have enough. This is no way to live. What will you do?" The water carrier said, I do not waste time worrying about what I cannot control and what has not happened yet. Instead, I am happy that I have my faith, and I trust that all will be well. The king plotted another plan, and the next day a new law was passed banning water carrying. The once cobbler, now water carrier, left his home the next morning and learned of the new law. He wondered what he would do. In wandering around the market town, he saw a market store selling wood. However, he noticed that as soon as the wood arrived at the stall, it was immediately sold, and the wood carriers were struggling to keep up with demand. He offered his help. It was accepted, and so he was a forester for the day. It was very hard work, and once finished, the owner paid him very well indeed. He was able to buy bread, cheese, and meat for his dinner. The king in his rags turned up at the man's door and knocked, eager to know how he had coped with the new law. Once inside the man's home, he noticed bread and cheese and meat on the table, and again was welcome to share it. The king asked, "How did you afford all of this? I heard through the grapevine that there was a law banning water carriers." The man told the king in the rags the story of his day as a forester. The king again felt frustrated and asked, "What if tomorrow they don't need wood fetching? This is no way to live. What will you do?" The now forester replied, "I do not waste time worrying about what I cannot control and what has not happened yet. Instead, I am happy that I have my faith, and I trust that all will be well." The king, now enraged, plotted a third plan. All forest workers must drop axes and protect the king as armed guardsmen at the palace. So the once cobbler, water carrier, forester was now an armed guardsman. He was kitted out with the uniform and sword, and there he stood at the palace all day long in the hot, blistering sun. Once his day was done, he went to the head guardsman for payment. The head guardsman laughed at him and said, No, you're at the palace now. We pay monthly. Come back then and we'll pay you what is owed." So he headed home, and he worried about not having any money to buy food. He was thirsty and hungry and tired. A thought then came to his mind, and he popped into the pawn shop and pawned the blade of the sword. He was given enough money to last at least a month, and his plan was to reclaim the blade once he had been paid. No one would be the wiser, as all he did was stand guard all day, with no use for his sword other than for appearances. He went and treated himself to bread, cheese, meat, and fruit, and his spread was all over the table at home. The king, back in his rags, disguised as a beggar, returned to learn about how the dear old man had coped with the new law. He knocked on the door and was again welcomed in to share the supper. "Where on earth did you find the money to buy all of this food? There's bread, cheese, meat, and fruit here. I had heard through the grapevine that the king had called all forest workers to the palace, and I know from speaking to people that the palace only pay monthly. How have you afforded all this food?" The now guardsman told the king in rags about his day and the pawning of the blade. He also confided in him that he planned to make a makeshift wooden blade just to see him through the month so he looked the part. The king was outraged but hid his fury. "What if you're caught? What if you're asked to draw your sword? You'll be hanged. Aren't you worried about that?" The man replied, "I do not waste time worrying about what I cannot control and what has not happened yet. Instead, I am happy that I have my faith, and I trust that all will be well." The next day, the king, back in his palace, arranged for a thief to be captured and brought before the guardsmen for beheading. A crowd of townspeople gathered, waiting with bated breath for the execution. The thief begged forgiveness and explained that he was starving and only had stolen 3 apples. The guardsman was ordered to draw his sword and chop off the man's head. Obviously, knowing that his sword was made of wood, he was a bit concerned on how this situation was going to pan out. It looked a bit hopeless. If he allowed the thief to flee, he'd be in trouble, and the thief would probably be killed anyway. If he told the truth about pawning the blade, he would also be in trouble. A thought then came to him, and he raised his arms into the sky and said, "God Almighty, give me a sign. If this thief should be spared from death for his crime, turn my sword into wood and let him flee." He then drew the wooden sword, and the crowd was aghast. The thief ran off free, and the king finally understood. Thank you for listening.